I am 32 years old, and for 7 of those years, I was married to a man who loved his mother more than he loved me. I knew this, in a vague, abstract way, from the beginning. I saw it in the way he would change his opinion to match hers, the way he would relay her backhanded compliments to me, as if they were genuine praise. But I never understood the true depth of it until the day our future was stolen, not by a thief in the night, but by a polite, smiling scammer on the other side of the world, and my mother-in-law was the one who held the door open for him. The line that was crossed was not just about the money. It was about the casual betrayal, the assumption that my dreams, my work, my contributions were secondary to her whims. They took $75,000 from our joint savings, money I had earned and painstakingly saved for a down payment on a house, and gave it away. And when I found out, they had the audacity to call me selfish. That was the moment I stopped trying to be a part of their family and started planning how to burn their perfect world to the ground. Our family dynamic was a carefully constructed pyramid with my mother-in-law, Eleanor, at the top. She was a woman who valued appearances above all else. Her house was immaculate, her garden was perfect, and her 2 children were her prized possessions. Her daughter, Clara, was the golden child. Clara could do no wrong. Her son, my husband Mark, was the devoted servant, desperate for the approval Clara received so freely. And I was the outsider, the necessary but slightly inconvenient addition who made the family portrait complete. Eleanor's approval was a currency, and she spent it lavishly on Clara while keeping Mark on a starvation diet, ensuring he would always come back for more. She was never openly cruel to me. It was always more subtle. She would praise my cooking while adding that Clara's version of the same dish was just a little more authentic. She would comment on how brave I was to wear a certain color, her tone implying it was a fashion mistake. For years, I played my part. I smiled at the little digs. I hosted holidays and cooked elaborate meals, hoping to earn my place. I worked overtime, taking on extra projects, funneling every spare dollar into our house fund. That fund was my symbol of hope. It was our escape plan from the small apartment we lived in, a place too close to Eleanor's suffocating orbit. Mark and I had talked about it for years. A little house with a yard, a place where we could finally be our own family. The savings account was technically in Mark's name. He had insisted on it years ago. He said it would simplify things if we needed a small loan from his parents to get us over the finish line for the house. His father, a quiet and perpetually tired man named George, had offered it once. The loan never happened, but the account remained solely in Mark's name. I trusted him. That was my first and greatest mistake. I thought we were a team. I learned we were not. He was on his mother's team, and I was just a temporary player they had recruited for my salary. The pressure on Mark was immense, a constant, low-grade hum of expectation from his mother. He had to succeed, but not so much that he overshadowed Clara. He had to be available, but not so needy that he became a burden. He spent his life walking this tightrope, and it made him weak. He avoided conflict at all costs, especially with his mother. Her slightest frown could send him into a spiral of anxiety. He would agree to anything to make her happy, a fact she exploited with surgical precision. I saw it, but I told myself it was just a mother and son who were very close. I told myself that once we had our own house, our own space, things would change. He would finally be able to put me first. I was young and naive enough to believe that a mortgage could fix a man. I didn't know then that some men are not broken, they are simply built to serve a different master. The money was just the tool they used to show me my true place in their world. It was at the bottom of the pyramid, holding everyone else up, and expected to do so with a grateful smile. The day it all began to unravel was a Tuesday. It was gray and raining outside, the kind of day that matched the cold dread that was about to settle into my life. Mark came home from work early. He never came home early. He walked into the apartment and dropped his keys on the counter with a clatter that sounded too loud in the quiet room. I was in the kitchen making dinner. I looked up, and the expression on his face stopped me cold. He looked pale, almost sick. His eyes were wide and unfocused. My first thought was that someone was hurt, that there had been an accident. My heart started to beat a little faster. "What is it?" I asked. "What's wrong?" He just stood there for a moment, staring at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked like a man about to confess a terrible sin. He finally managed to speak, his voice a hoarse whisper. "We need to talk," he said. We sat down at our small kitchen table. He couldn't look me in the eye. He stared at his hands, twisting them together in his lap. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy with unspoken words. I waited, my patience wearing thin, the initial fear turning into a simmering irritation. "Mark, you're scaring me," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Just tell me what happened." He took a deep breath. "It's about the house fund," he started, his voice cracking on the last word. The money, a cold knot formed in my stomach. I knew, even before he said another word, that it was bad. I had just checked the account balance the week before. It was our victory lap, the final stretch. $75,000. The product of 5 years of sacrifice, of skipped vacations and old cars and budget meals. "What about the money?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were full of a miserable cocktail of guilt and fear. "It's gone," he said. "I gave it to my mother." The words hung in the air between us.
Gone.
I felt my mind go blank for a second, unable to process the statement. It didn't make any sense. "What do you mean you gave it to her?" I asked. "Like, to hold on to? For safekeeping?" I was grasping at straws, trying to find a logical explanation for the illogical. He shook his head slowly, the movement full of defeat.
"No," he said.
"She needed it. There was an emergency, an emergency." Eleanor's life was the opposite of an emergency. It was a meticulously planned schedule of gardening clubs and lunch dates. "What kind of emergency costs $75,000? I demanded. My voice was rising now, the shock giving way to a hot surge of anger. "Mark, what is going on?" He started to stammer, the words tumbling out in a disorganized mess. "It was for family," he said. "It's complicated. It was for Leo." Leo was Clara's son, my nephew. He was 10 years old. The idea of him needing that much money for an emergency was terrifying. "Is he okay?" I asked, the anger momentarily replaced by concern. "What happened to Leo?" Mark looked away again, unable to meet my gaze. "He's fine," he mumbled. "It wasn't that kind of emergency." My mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. Leo was fine, but there was an emergency that cost our entire life savings. It made no sense. Then what kind of emergency was it? I pressed. "Mark, you need to tell me exactly what happened." "Right now," he sighed, a long, weary sound. "Mom said not to tell you," he confessed. "She said you wouldn't understand. She said you'd be difficult." The condescension in that statement, relayed so casually by my own husband, was like a slap in the face. It felt like my mother-in-law was in the room with us, speaking through him. "Difficult?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Our entire down payment is gone, and she was worried I'd be difficult?" "You have to be kidding me." I stood up and started pacing the small kitchen, my hands clenched into fists. I felt trapped, cornered by a secret I was not allowed to be a part of, but one I was expected to pay for. "This is our money, Mark," I said, stopping in front of him. "Mine and yours. You had no right to give it away without talking to me. I don't care what the emergency was." "You had no right." He flinched, but he didn't argue. He just sat there, a statue of misery. The confession wasn't over. I knew it. This was just the first layer of the lie. The next morning, the silence in our apartment was deafening. Mark had slept on the couch. I had lain awake all night, staring at the ceiling, the same questions circling endlessly in my mind. How could he do this? How could he betray our partnership so completely? I decided I couldn't rely on him for the truth. He was too compromised, too afraid of his mother. I needed to go around him. I picked up my phone and called his sister, Clara. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hey, what's up?" she asked. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi, Clara," I said. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was just calling to check in." Mark mentioned there was some kind of emergency with Leo. Is everything okay? There was a pause on the other end of the line. An emergency with Leo? She repeated, her voice filled with genuine confusion. No, he's fine. He's at school right now. Why would Mark say that? The bottom dropped out of my stomach. He had lied. It was a deliberate, calculated lie to hide something else. I don't know, I said, trying to sound casual. He must have gotten his wires crossed. I'm glad to hear everything is all right. We exchanged a few more pleasantries before hanging up. I sat there, phone in hand, the truth settling in like a block of ice in my chest. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a conspiracy. I knew I needed help, an outside perspective. I called my best friend, Sarah. She was a paralegal, practical and clear-headed, the exact opposite of the emotional storm I was trapped in. I explained the situation, my voice trembling as I recounted the conversation with Mark and the subsequent call with Clara. Sarah listened patiently, letting me vent my frustration and fear. When I was done, she didn't offer empty platitudes. She offered a plan. You need to see the bank statements, she said, her voice firm. Don't ask him for them. Get them yourself. You need to see exactly where that money went. The paper trail is everything. Her words cut through my panic and gave me a focus. A mission. The account was in Mark's name, but I knew his login information. We had set it up together years ago, and he wasn't the type to change passwords. That night, after he fell asleep on the couch again, I went to his laptop. My hands were shaking as I typed in the website for our bank. I felt like a criminal, sneaking around in my own home, but I knew I had no other choice. They had forced my hand. I logged in. The main page loaded, and I navigated to the transaction history. I scrolled down, my heart pounding in my ears. And then I saw it. It wasn't one transfer. It was a series of them. 5 separate wire transfers, each for $15,000, spread out over 2 weeks. And they weren't to Eleanor or Clara. They were sent to an overseas bank, to an account under a name I had never seen before. The screen glowed in the dark room, illuminating the stark, undeniable proof of the lie. The money wasn't for Leo. It wasn't for a family emergency. It was gone, wired to a stranger in another country. I took a screenshot of the transaction history, my mind cold and clear. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound, but something else was beginning to grow in its place. A cold, hard resolve. I walked into the living room and turned on the light. Mark stirred, blinking in the sudden brightness. I held the phone out to him, the screenshot of the bank records displayed on the screen. Who is this? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. Who did you send our money to? He stared at the screen, his face crumbling as he realized he was caught. The lies had run out. He finally broke down, the whole sordid story pouring out of him in a torrent of sobs and half-finished sentences. It wasn't an emergency for Leo. It was for his mother. She had told him it was for a special investment, a secret opportunity just for her favorite grandchild. But the grandchild wasn't Leo. According to Mark, Eleanor had confessed to him that she had another grandchild, one no one knew about. A secret from her past. And this secret grandchild desperately needed her help. The story was so outlandish, so utterly unbelievable, that for a moment, I thought he had to be making it up. But as I looked at his pathetic, tear-stained face, I knew he was telling me the truth as he understood it. His mother had been scammed, and my husband had helped her hand over our life savings to a thief. The full story was even more absurd than I could have imagined. Mark, in a halting and shamefaced confession, laid it all out. His mother, Eleanor, had been contacted online a few months prior. A message on a social media platform from someone claiming to be the child of a man she had dated briefly in college, long before she met Mark's father. This person, who called themselves Alex, claimed that their father had confessed on his deathbed that Eleanor was his one true love and that he had fathered a child he never knew. Alex, this supposed grandchild, had spun a tale of a difficult life, of hardship and struggle, and had finally found the grandmother they had never known. Eleanor, a woman who craved drama and attention, had swallowed the story whole. She was flattered. She was excited. It was a secret she could hold over everyone, a new source of importance. She began a secret online relationship with this phantom grandchild. At first, it was just messages. Then came the requests for money. It started small. A few $100s for groceries. 1,000 for a medical bill. Then the stories got bigger, more desperate. Alex was in legal trouble. Alex needed to bribe an official to get a passport to finally come and meet the family. Alex needed a large sum of money to secure a guaranteed inheritance that was tied up in red tape. Each request was more urgent than the last, and Eleanor, blinded by her fantasy, paid every time. She drained her own savings first. When that was gone, she turned to the only person she knew she could control completely. She went to Mark. She swore him to secrecy, telling him it was a delicate family matter. She framed it as a test of his loyalty. She told him this was a chance to help his real family, his blood, and that I, as an outsider, would never understand the importance of it. Mark, desperate for her approval, didn't question it. He didn't push back. He didn't even stop to consider the sheer insanity of the story. He just saw his mother asking for help, and he obeyed. He made the transfers from our account, the account I had filled with my own hard work, and he hid it from me. He watched me talk excitedly about looking at houses online. He listened to my plans for our future, all while knowing that future was being wired away $15,000 at a time to a complete stranger. Listening to him, I felt a profound sense of pity mixed with my disgust. He wasn't a monster. He was just a weak man, a boy in a grown man's body, still trying to please his mommy. But my pity didn't erase the consequences of his weakness. He had made a choice. He had chosen his mother's fantasy over our shared reality. When I insisted we confront Eleanor together, Mark resisted. He begged me to let it go. She's already been through so much, he pleaded. Finding out about this grandchild has been very emotional for her. I stared at him in disbelief. She hasn't been through anything, Mark, I said, my voice dangerously calm. She's been having a fun little adventure with a pen pal while spending our life savings. We are the ones who are going through so much, but he wouldn't budge. So I told him I would go alone. That threat was enough to get him in the car. We drove to his parents' house in a tense, suffocating silence. Eleanor greeted us at the door with a bright, brittle smile. Clara was already there, sitting in the living room, sipping tea. It felt like an ambush. Before I could even speak, Eleanor launched her preemptive strike. Mark told me you were a little upset about the loan, she said, her tone light and airy, as if we were discussing the weather. I do wish you wouldn't worry so much about money. It's so unbecoming. I looked at Mark, who was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. He had called her. He had warned her I was coming, and he had framed it as me being upset about a loan. He had already set the narrative, casting me as the greedy, hysterical wife. That was when Clara chimed in, her voice dripping with condescending sympathy. We just don't want you to stress, that's all, she said, giving me a pitying look. Mom has a lot on her plate right now. Family has to support family. You of all people should understand that the hypocrisy was staggering. They were lecturing me about family support after they had colluded to steal from me. The anger that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over. This was not a loan, I said, my voice shaking with rage. And this is not about family support. This is about $75,000 that you, Eleanor, took from us under false pretenses. You lied to your son, and you stole our future. Eleanor's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of wounded indignation. How dare you speak to me that way in my own home, she said, her voice trembling with theatrical outrage. I have done nothing wrong. I was helping my grandchild, a poor, unfortunate soul who has no one else in the world. Clara rushed to her mother's side, putting a comforting arm around her. See what you've done? She hissed at me. You're upsetting her. All you care about is the money. You're so selfish. They stood there, a united front of delusion and self-righteousness, painting me as the villain. Mark stood off to the side, silent and useless, his face a portrait of pathetic indecision. He said nothing to defend me. He said nothing to defend the truth. He just let them attack me. That was the moment I knew my marriage was over. It wasn't just the money anymore. It was the realization that in their family, I would always be the enemy. They would burn me to keep themselves warm, and my husband would hand them the matches. I left Eleanor's house that day feeling utterly alone. The drive home was a blur of angry tears. Mark tried to talk to me, offering weak apologies and weaker excuses. "They're just protective of each other," he said. "They don't mean it." I didn't even bother to respond. What was the point? He was a translator for their toxicity, softening the blows he had allowed them to land. When we got back to our apartment, the place felt foreign, tainted. It was no longer our home. It was just a place I lived with a man who had betrayed me. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. I needed to think. I needed a plan. The anger was still there, a white-hot fire in my chest, but underneath it, something else was taking shape. Resolve. They thought I would just cry and yell, and eventually get over it. They expected me to fall back in line, to accept the loss and move on, because that's what I had always done. I had always been the one to smooth things over, to keep the peace. But they had pushed me too far. They had mistaken my patience for weakness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to Mark's restless movements on the couch, and I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not let them get away with this. I would not be their victim. I would get justice. Not just for the money, but for the years of disrespect, for being treated like I was disposable. My mind started working, sifting through the details, looking for a weapon. The story Eleanor believed was ridiculous. A secret grandchild, an overseas inheritance, legal troubles. It screamed scam. A very common one. And if it was a common scam, there would be a record of it somewhere. The next morning, while Mark was in the shower, I opened my laptop. I bypassed the real estate websites I used to browse and typed a new address into the search bar. The official website for the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. IC3. I started to fill out the form, detailing everything Mark had told me. The name, Alex, the sob stories. The wire transfers to a foreign bank. With every word I typed, I felt a piece of my power returning. I was no longer just reacting to their drama. I was taking action. I was building my case. When I clicked the submit button, I didn't know if anything would come of it. But it was a start. It was my first small move in a war they didn't even know I was planning to fight. The days that followed were a strange sort of limbo. Mark and I were living like roommates, communicating only when absolutely necessary. He would try to breach the silence with small talk about work or the weather, and I would respond with single words, my voice flat and cold. He was trying to pretend that if we ignored the gaping wound in our marriage, it would simply heal on its own. He didn't understand that I was the one holding the scalpel, preparing to cut out the infection for good. He thought my silence was me processing, grieving. He had no idea it was me planning. Meanwhile, the family narrative had been firmly established. I was the greedy daughter-in-law who was making Eleanor sick with worry. Clara would call Mark, her voice full of fake concern, asking how he was holding up under the strain of my unreasonable behavior. He would relay these messages to me, as if to prove how much they cared. "Clara is just worried about us," he'd say. "She thinks you're being too hard on Mom." Each time, it was like another small twist of a knife. They were gaslighting me through him, and he was a willing participant. He was so desperate to maintain the illusion of a happy family that he was willing to sacrifice my sanity for it. He wanted me to apologize, to go to his mother, hat in hand, and say I was sorry for being upset that she had given our life savings to a con artist. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I continued my own quiet investigation. I started reading everything I could find about family romance scams. The stories were chillingly similar to Eleanor's. The long-lost relative, the immediate emotional connection, the escalating series of crises that only money could solve. The scammers were masters of manipulation, preying on loneliness and ego. Eleanor, with her desperate need to be the center of a dramatic story, was the perfect target. The more I read, the more certain I was. I wasn't just dealing with a foolish old woman. I was dealing with a criminal enterprise, and my husband had been her willing accomplice. He had unlocked the bank vault for them. I started documenting everything. I saved the screenshots of the wire transfers. I wrote down the timeline of events as Mark had confessed them to me. I even managed to find the social media profile of Alex. It was a ghost account, created only a few months before, with a handful of stolen photos and a generic backstory. It was so obviously fake that a child could have seen through it. But Eleanor and Mark, blinded by their own emotional needs, had chosen not to see. They wanted to believe. Believing the fantasy was easier than facing the ugly truth of their own dysfunction. About a week after I filed the report with the IC3, I received an email. It was from a field agent. He wanted to schedule a phone call. My heart leaped. This was it. This was real. I scheduled the call for my lunch break the next day, making sure I would be alone. The agent's name was Miller, and his voice was calm and professional. He asked me to verify the details of my report, which I did. Then, he confirmed my suspicions in a way that was both validating and horrifying. "Ma'am, what you've described is a classic grandparent scam with a few variations," he explained. "These are highly organized groups, often operating from overseas. They are very, very good at what they do. They research their targets and tailor the story to fit their emotional vulnerabilities." He told me the name on the wire transfer was a known money mule account, a temporary stop for funds that were quickly laundered and moved elsewhere. He was blunt about the chances of getting the money back. "I have to be honest with you," he said. "The likelihood of recovery is extremely low. Once the money is wired overseas, it's virtually impossible to trace." I felt a pang of disappointment, but it was quickly replaced by something else. He wasn't just telling me the money was gone. He was telling me I was right. "So, it was definitely a scam?" I asked, needing to hear the official confirmation. "Without a doubt," he said. "We've seen this exact script hundreds of times." He promised to send me an official summary of his findings for my records, a formal report that would outline the nature of the scam. As I hung up the phone, I felt a grim sense of triumph. I had the truth. And soon I would have it in writing. I had my weapon. Now I just needed to choose the right battlefield. Easter was just a few weeks away. In Mark's family, Easter was a major event. It was even bigger than Christmas. It was Eleanor's favorite holiday, a command performance of family togetherness. Everyone was expected to attend a lavish brunch at her house. There were pastel decorations, a massive ham, and a mandatory Easter egg hunt for the kids. It was a pageant of perfection, a day for Eleanor to preside over her flawless family and show them off to any neighbors who might be watching. In the past, I had dreaded it. The forced smiles, the stilted conversation, the subtle jabs from Eleanor about my cooking or my outfit. But this year, a new idea began to form in my mind. This year, I saw Easter not as an obligation, but as an opportunity. It was the perfect stage. The entire family would be there. The aunts, the uncles, the cousins. Everyone who had heard the whispered rumors that I was the difficult, money-obsessed shrew who was making poor Eleanor's life miserable. They would all be gathered in one place, witnesses to the fiction of their happy family. What better place to introduce a little bit of truth, a little bit of reality, to spoil the performance? The plan began to take shape, simple and brutal in its elegance. I would give my mother-in-law an Easter present she would never forget. The official report from the FBI arrived in my email a week before Easter. It was a simple PDF document, 3 pages long. It was dry, factual, and utterly devastating. It detailed the classic markers of the scam. It identified the country where the Money Mule account was based. It even included links to public service announcements warning about this exact type of fraud. It was cold, hard, undeniable proof. I printed it out on high-quality paper. I went to a copy shop and had them bind it in a simple, professional-looking black cover. It looked official. It looked important. It looked like something you could not ignore. I then went to a department store. I walked through the seasonal aisle, with its fluffy bunnies and brightly colored candies. I picked out the largest, most elaborate Easter basket I could find. It was a wicker monstrosity, adorned with ribbons and bows in shades of pink and lavender. I bought bags of the most expensive chocolate eggs, the kind wrapped in shiny foil. I bought a bag of that crinkly, plastic green grass that gets everywhere. I was building a Trojan horse, a beautiful, festive package designed to deliver a devastating payload. The days leading up to Easter Sunday were thick with a cloying, false pleasantry. Mark, seeing that I was no longer actively hostile, mistook my quiet focus for forgiveness. He started trying to be affectionate again, putting his arm around me in the kitchen, telling me he loved me. I let him. I played the part of the wife who was coming around. It was a nauseating performance, but it was necessary for my plan. I needed them to be completely unsuspecting. I needed them to walk into my trap with their guards down. I even talked to Eleanor on the phone. She was sweet as pie, her voice dripping with the fake warmth she reserved for public consumption. "I'm so looking forward to seeing you on Sunday, dear," she cooed. "I'm making your favorite dessert. I'm looking forward to it too," I replied, my voice perfectly even. "I have a special gift for you." "Oh, you shouldn't have," she said, her voice filled with delight. "You're too good to us." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. She had no idea. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully stolen my money, turned my husband against me, and painted me as the villain, and that I had simply accepted it. She thought I was coming to her party to celebrate her victory. She was about to learn a very hard lesson about underestimating the quiet ones. On Saturday night, I assembled the basket. I filled the bottom with the green plastic grass. I carefully arranged the chocolate eggs around the edges. And in the center, nestled among the treats like a poisonous snake in a flower bed, I placed the bound FBI report. It looked almost beautiful, a perfect picture of holiday cheer. But I knew it was a bomb, and I was going to light the fuse in less than 24 hours. Easter Sunday arrived, a bright, sunny day that was completely at odds with the storm I was about to unleash. Mark was in a good mood, humming to himself as he got dressed. He thought we were turning a corner. He thought his life was snapping back into its comfortable, easy shape. He saw the large, festive basket I was bringing. "Wow, that's for Mom?" he asked, impressed. "She's going to love that. I think it's something she'll really remember," I said, my smile not reaching my eyes. We drove to his parents' house, the basket sitting on the back seat like a silent passenger. When we arrived, the house was already full. The air was thick with the smell of baked ham and lilies. Cousins were chasing children through the yard. Uncles were gathered in the living room, talking about sports. It was a perfect domestic scene, a Norman Rockwell painting of family bliss. Eleanor greeted me at the door with a hug that felt like a cage. "I'm so glad you came," she whispered, her voice full of meaning. "I knew you'd do the right thing." She led me into the living room, where the family was exchanging small gifts and cards. The time was right. It was showtime. I walked over to where Eleanor was sitting, holding court from her favorite armchair. Clara was perched on the armrest, looking smug. I held out the basket. "Happy Easter, Eleanor," I said, my voice loud enough for the room to hear. "This is for you." A hush fell over the room as everyone turned to look. Eleanor's face lit up with genuine pleasure. She loved being the center of attention, and a grand gesture like this was exactly what her ego craved. "Oh, my goodness," she exclaimed, taking the heavy basket from me. "You really didn't have to do this." "It's beautiful." She began to rummage through the contents, pulling out a few of the chocolate eggs and showing them to a nearby cousin. "Look at these, aren't they lovely?" she said. She dug a little deeper, her fingers pushing aside the plastic grass. Then, her hand touched the hard cover of the report. Her smile faltered. She pulled it out, a confused expression on her face. She held it up, looking at the plain black cover. "What is this?" she asked, her voice losing its cheerful lilt. "It looks like some kind of book." I stepped forward, making sure I was in the center of the room, my voice clear and steady. "It's a gift," I said. "It's the story of your new grandchild." A wave of confusion rippled through the room. People exchanged puzzled glances. Mark looked at me, his eyes wide with dawning horror. He was starting to realize this was not a peace offering. Clara stood up, her face a mask of anger. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "What is this?" "You're ruining Easter." I ignored her. I kept my eyes locked on Eleanor, who was staring at the report as if it were a venomous snake. "Open it, Eleanor," I said. "Read the title." Her hands were trembling as she opened the cover. She read the words on the first page, her face draining of all color. "Internet Crime Complaint Center," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Case summary." I took a step closer. "Your mother isn't just ruining Easter, Clara," I said, my voice ringing with a cold fury I didn't know I possessed. "Your mother, with the help of my husband, ruined our future. She took $75,000 from us and gave it to a scammer. This report proves it." I reached out and took the report from Eleanor's limp hands. I held it up for everyone to see. "I'm sure you've all heard that I've been difficult lately," I said, scanning the faces of the assembled relatives. "That I'm selfish and obsessed with money. Well, I'd like to read you a few highlights from the official FBI report about where our money actually went." I opened the report to the first page. The room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the children seemed to sense the tension and had stopped their playing. "Case type: grandparent/romance scam," I began, my voice clear and unwavering. "The perpetrator, operating under the alias Alex Peterson, initiated contact with the victim, Eleanor Vance, via a social media platform. The perpetrator established a false identity as a long-lost grandchild to build emotional trust." I saw Eleanor flinch at the sound of the name. I continued. "Over a period of 6 weeks, the perpetrator fabricated a series of escalating personal crises requiring financial assistance. These included fabricated medical emergencies, legal fees, and travel expenses." I looked up from the page and met Clara's furious gaze. "Does any of this sound familiar?" I asked her. "Did your mother tell you about the poor, unfortunate soul who needed her help?" Clara's mouth opened, but no words came out. I turned to the next page. Financial records indicate 5 wire transfers, totaling $75,000, were made from an account belonging to Mark Vance. The funds were sent to a bank in Southeast Asia, to an account identified as a temporary holding account for a known international crime syndicate specializing in online fraud. A collective gasp went through the room. The words "crime syndicate" hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. I saw Mark's father, George, sink back into his chair, his face ashen. Mark himself looked like he was going to be sick. He was staring at me, his expression a mixture of terror and disbelief. He couldn't believe I was actually doing this. He couldn't believe I was destroying the perfect family picture he had tried so hard to protect. The final act of my performance was for my husband. I closed the report and turned to face him directly. The rest of the family faded into the background. It was just the two of us, standing in the ruins of our marriage. "You knew this," I said, my voice low and shaking with the force of my emotions. "You knew the story was crazy. You knew it was wrong to take our money without telling me. But you did it anyway. You did it because you are more afraid of disappointing her than you are of betraying me." He tried to speak, to offer some defense, but I cut him off. "You made a choice, Mark," I continued, the words coming out hard and sharp, like pieces of glass. "Every time you made one of those transfers, you made a choice. Every time you lied to my face about it, you made a choice. And when I came to you, hurt and betrayed, you chose them again. You stood by and let them call me selfish and greedy for wanting our life back." I took a deep breath, the finality of my decision settling over me. "So now I'm making a choice," I said. "We are done. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." A fresh wave of shock washed over the room. Eleanor started to sob, not quiet tears of remorse, but loud, gulping sobs of pure, unadulterated humiliation. Her perfect Easter was in tatters. Her perfect family was exposed as a sham. "And one more thing," I added, my voice like ice. "I will be suing both of you. You, Mark, for the fraudulent transfers from our joint savings. And you, Eleanor, for conspiracy and theft. I will get my money back." I dropped the FBI report onto the coffee table with a loud thud. "Happy Easter," I said to the silent, stunned room. Then I turned around, walked out the front door, and never looked back. The aftermath was exactly as chaotic and satisfying as I had hoped. My phone started blowing up before I had even reached the end of the street. First, it was Mark, leaving a string of panicked, incoherent voicemails. Then came Clara, her messages a toxic blend of screaming rage and accusations. I didn't listen to any of them. I just turned my phone off and drove to Sarah's apartment. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug.
"You did it," she said.
I nodded, a slow, weary smile spreading across my face. "I did it," I repeated. "It's over." We spent the rest of the day on her couch, drinking wine and talking about the future. My future. For the first time in years, it felt like it was truly my own. The next day, I turned my phone back on. There was a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was from Mark's aunt, his father's sister. I had always liked her. She was a quiet, sensible woman who mostly stayed on the periphery of the family drama. I decided to call her back. "I just wanted to say I'm so sorry, dear," she said, her voice full of genuine sorrow. "I had no idea it was that bad. What Eleanor did, and Mark letting her. There's no excuse for it. None at all. You did the right thing." Her words were like a bomb on a raw wound. It was a small thing, but it meant the world to know that at least one person in that family saw the truth. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. My lawyer was fantastic, a sharp, no-nonsense woman Sarah had recommended. When Mark was served with the divorce papers and the notice of a lawsuit, he finally seemed to grasp the reality of the situation. He tried to fight it at first, hiring a lawyer who tried to argue that the money was a family gift, but the evidence was irrefutable. I had the bank statements. I had the FBI report. I had Mark's own tearful confession, which I had documented in a detailed journal entry the night it happened. Faced with a lawsuit he could not possibly win, Mark's lawyer advised him to settle. The negotiation was tense. Eleanor and Clara tried to interfere, calling Mark's lawyer, calling my lawyer, trying to spin their narrative of me as a vindictive gold digger. But the facts were the facts. In the end, they had to capitulate. To pay me back my half of the $75,000 plus my legal fees, Mark was forced to sell the expensive car his mother had bought him as a wedding gift. It was a status symbol he had cherished, a constant reminder of her favor. Watching him sign the title over to a stranger was a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. Eleanor had to contribute from her own retirement funds, a painful blow to the comfortable future she had always taken for granted. A few weeks after the settlement was finalized, I got one last call from Mark. His voice was small, pathetic. "Can't we fix this?" he asked. "I miss you. I made a mistake." I felt a brief flicker of the old affection I once had for him, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of his betrayal. "No, Mark," I said, my voice calm and firm. "We can't. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to betray me, to lie to me, and to side with people who disrespected me. That's not something you can fix." I heard him start to cry on the other end of the line, but this time, his tears had no effect on me. "Goodbye, Mark," I said, and I hung up the phone. I blocked his number, and Clara's and Eleanor's. I cut them out of my life like the cancer they were. I got my money. I used it to put a down payment on a small condo in a different part of the city, a place that was all mine. It wasn't the big house with the yard I had dreamed of, but it was better. It was free. It was a sanctuary, a place where no one would ever make me feel small or unimportant again. They thought I would just quietly absorb the loss, that I would swallow their disrespect and carry on, because that was the role they had assigned me. They learned that my silence had never been weakness. It was just me waiting, gathering my strength, and choosing the perfect moment to strike. They finally learned what it feels like to have your perfect family picture shattered into a million pieces. And I learned that the best revenge isn't loud and explosive, but cold, calculated, and delivered in a beautiful Easter basket.